So now we're going to have Summer Reese, who is an associate of Larry Teeter and has also been helping out enormously to make this conference work, and also connected with KPFK here, the Pacific Station, and she's going to talk a little bit about Larry Teeter's papers and some of the legal aspects.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks.
Thank you. So yes, thank you all for coming this weekend. It's nice to have such a nice turnout for this. I was a longtime personal friend of Lawrence Teeter's, and I do paralegal work, and we actually met at the Los Angeles Downtown Law Library over a copy machine one night back when it was still open at night, back in the 90s. And I knew more about this case in terms of his regular duelings with the California Supreme Court and trying to get Ronald George to recuse himself and current venue issues. That's what we would talk shop about, not really the underlying issues of the case, but really what was going on right now dealing with the court system. But when he became ill and went to the hospital, basically I promised to see to it that this case, as well as the rest of his cases, got handled appropriately so that he could go ahead and die in peace and stop stressing out about it, because that's all he could think about while he was on his deathbed was Sirhan's case and the upcoming court cases that he had filed at that time, and that they would continue and wouldn't just die on the vine and Sirhan would be abandoned in prison. So I have done my best to continue that work, and we have over the course of the last couple of years gotten Dr. William Pepper involved, and he's now, publicly taken the case, which is fantastic. And I have been dealing with the state bar for the last 3 years because I was Larry's appointed person to wrap up his legal practice. And in California, you can pick someone and say, this is who's going to wrap up my legal practice and deal with my files and notify my clients, and that was me. But unfortunately, his house had been taken over by people, and the locks had been changed, and his files were being strewn about the floor, sorted through and ransacked. Computers had disappeared, and we couldn't get the 77th precinct of the LAPD to do anything, even though we actively had people who had taken over the house and had changed the locks. So we got a court order with the state bar. It took them, I knew they could get it a lot faster than I could, so we went and asked them, will you please take over his practice, because he practiced from his home, and his home has been basically expropriated, and his files are in danger, and his client's interests are jeopardized. So the state bar got a court order in about 48 hours, and we came back out there. Still couldn't get any help from the cops actually getting into the building, but we got into the building with locksmiths, kicked the people out, changed the locks, had a court order, and the state bar took possession of his files, which at that time were well over 200 boxes of files. I mean, covering his 30 years of practice, he was very involved in environmental litigation. He was a California Environmental Quality Act specialist, so he handled things to do with the Bayona Wetlands case, the Hollywood Bowl, and many other important public interest cases besides the Sirhan case. And so they took all of these many cases, including whatever we hoped in the way of the Sirhan files were in these boxes, into their possession. And when we got into the house, the house really, there were papers all over the floor. It was clear, they had just been dumping out boxes, going through them. So we didn't know exactly what the state bar had. But the problem is, 3 years later, we still don't know what the state bar has, because we are still dealing with them. And as of only this past Monday, I have finally gotten admission from a supervisor at the state bar, and I quote, "We've completely dropped the ball. I admit we completely screwed this up." Because we, as of last fall, they wanted to destroy his files. They claimed they had notified everyone. They turned over 14 boxes to Munir, Sirhan's brother, and said, these are all the files on the Sirhan case. Well, when Munir went through them, 4 of the boxes were not even related to his brother's case. They included other people's tax returns, numerous documents belonging to other cases, some of them recent, some of them old. So Munir gave me those files to sort through, and after going through only a box and a half, I discovered 63 unrelated cases and documents, like completely unrelated, things to do with Bayona Wetlands case, other people's personal documents. Just nothing to do with the Sirhan matter at all. It was clear to me they had simply maybe taken boxes that were marked Sirhan, not looked through them, and simply dumped them into boxes and said, here are your brother's files. So I brought that to the state bar's attention by form of a declaration saying, it's clear to me we have an issue here. And I brought things to their attention in the past, the chief lawyer who took over his practice, like the service list. A service list is a list of clients or people interested in a case that you serve and say, you may be interested to attend this hearing because it impacts upon you. The only people listed on the service list were people I'd given them the names and addresses of. There wasn't a single person gleaned from actually going through the files. And I repeatedly said, how can you have 200 boxes of files and not have one client on this service list that didn't come from me? Surely you can find someone in here. And they said, oh, we did due diligence. There are no current addresses on any other clients. Well, when I went through these boxes, there were current cases like the Bayona Wetlands case that was still settling out its costs, and they were looking for their paperwork. They've got an office, organizations that exist right now who have current addresses. Clearly, like, all you had to do was either look at the file or pick up a phone and call information. So anyway, so I filed this declaration with them saying, hey, we've got a problem here. You can't destroy these files because we don't believe you've actually adequately sorted them. And according to Sirhan and Munir's recollections, there were dozens of boxes on the case, not 14. So anyway, figuring if out of 14, 4 of them are unrelated to your case, out of 200 boxes they still have, there could be a good percentage that are related to the case that they simply haven't found. So it took pulling teeth to pry a written acknowledgement from them saying, yes, we will not destroy any of Lawrence Teeter's files until you actually get 30 days notice and can object in court. So I said, okay, that's something. At least they're not going to get destroyed. Then I followed up with them again in January with a letter that says, we did a lot of back and forth on the phone. Their only solution to the fact that they hadn't sorted the files was I could come down on my own time, at my own expense, and sort them 2 boxes at a time at the state bar. And that was it. You know, I couldn't bring in paralegals with me. I couldn't bring in attorneys. I couldn't bring in any other legal professionals and say, we'll deploy a team on these boxes and get this over with. And they wouldn't turn them back over to me where I could also deploy a tean. So I said, so basically you're saying because you've screwed up the job on sorting these files, I can fix your mistake at my own expense, 2 boxes at a time for the rest of the year. And I thought that was unacceptable. So I wrote to them and said, you know, I'd like a response within 30 days as to why we can't do one of the 2 other alternatives. Go back into court and ask them to give me back jurisdiction over this case, of all these files, and just give them to me. You know, I don't mind sorting through the ratty old 30-year-old files. I'll do it, you know. Or, conversely, allow us to bring in, you know, qualified legal professionals who know their way around a case number to sort through them in a timely fashion. I got 0 response from the state bar, and it's only within the last couple of weeks that I finally gotten a supervisor who's willing to crawl down the neck of the assigned attorney, basically, and said, I will not abandon this until you have these files back in your possession. And we're now going through, I have to write them another letter, then they're going to write me a response letter, then I'm going to file an order to show cause, and then they will concur with my order to show cause, saying, yes, indeed, we agree, she should have the files back. So that's where we're at, and because of all of this, it has slowed down the federal habeas corpus petition that Dr. Pepper spoke about last night, because we've had to obtain like 6 continuances in the meantime because we don't have the files and there's no way to, you know, even see what we've got in the case without knowing if we have all of the files, since Lawrence had amassed just a tremendous amount of material on this case. So we may be looking at requesting yet another continuance because we're still waiting for the state bar to unhand the rest of the materials. So it's just been a very long saga, and all I can say is if you're ever dealing with the legal files of a dead friend, I mean, be tenacious. Be annoying. Don't give up, and don't ever believe what they tell you if they say they've sorted through them if you don't believe it. And if you're looking and you don't see people listed on there that should be, they didn't do it, you know? So whether it's incompetence or whatever, I tend to think incompetence is a more motivating human factor in a lot of these bureaucratic situations than an actual plan, because I think they were just hoping we'd go away, they'd destroy the files, that would be the end of it, who's going to ask? And at least that's not happening. We're getting somewhere with them, and I think we'll eventually pry them loose, but it's been literally a 3-year odyssey of trying to just get the files out of the state bar. And that's basically, that's what I came to give the update on, where things are at, how we got where we are, and how much fun it is to try and like just put the case back together. I mean, for example, when I went down to federal court to copy the habeas petition to send to New York to Dr. Pepper, it's a 5-volume case. Several of the volumes involving like venue and jurisdiction issues and statute of limitations issues, nothing, you know, with the meat of the case. The actual habeas petition, which was like 250 pages, isn't in the court file, okay? So we copy 1,200 files, I ship it to New York, and we're looking through them, and both of us, you know, I get a call, I'm looking through my copy, they're looking through. We don't have a copy of the actual petition. It's not in there. And I had asked the clerk, I'm like, aren't we missing something here? They didn't have it. They had to get it from the prosecuting attorney and say, you know, we've copied all the files, but we don't have the actual petition in here. So that's not the state bar, that's the court. So, I mean, you should feel really confident on the ability not to lose things once they enter the judicial system. So if you have any questions, that's, you know, that's the end of it that I'm involved in, really.
I know you don't want to stick your neck out too far, but who are these people that took over his house?
Oh, you'd like to think they were agents or something? No, just regular venial type people. I really don't think it was any, you know, big plot. There was a woman who lived in Lawrence's house, and there were issues with her and her boyfriend, and then there were other people who claimed to be relatives, but weren't actually, and so they kicked her out, and then they took over the premises, and we had like 2 sets of conflicting people, but none of them are like, in any way, in my opinion, like government related. I think that some people are the mistaken opinion that they can actually profit off of things like court documents. And frankly, they're public record. I mean, what are you going to do, sell them on eBay? I don't know, you know, I mean, and the other people, you know, they were taking computers and things that were of value. I mean, things disappeared from Larry's house, like, you know, telescopes and stuff that were actually worth money. So it's really, in my opinion, we were dealing with just base criminality, not anything, frankly, really to do with the case, except for, you know, maybe the people who were living there, you know, because they knew about his work. I mean, seem to have an unnatural interest, according to the State Bar, in the Sirhan case in particular. So it is conceivable that, you know, I have no way of dividing which set of those two people actually disappeared with everything, you know. So, the first set of people may have been motivated by some political interest in the Sirhan case to take files for reasons of their own that are frankly beyond me, you know. Yeah, seriously. I mean, we live in this eBay culture, you know what I mean? People are like, oh my gosh, I've got the original, whatever, fill in the blank, you know what I mean? And unfortunately, is they compromise the case that way because, you know, an attorney works on a case for a decade and gathers and amasses evidence and papers and witnesses and documents and things that are, you know, hard to come by. And you know, you have no way to really reconstruct that. You don't know what's lost. All you have are court filings, and most attorneys working, especially on a really complicated case like this, are going to have a lot of underlying documents besides court documents. So the unfortunate part is we frankly don't know what is lost, and until the State Bar cooperates, we don't know what's still available because, seriously, there could be 20 boxes of his files still stuck in the State Bar's system because, I mean, if they can't sort their way through 14 boxes and actually correctly do it, can you imagine what they're doing with the other 200? I mean, it was total incompetency, in my opinion. I mean, you don't turn over the wrong client's files to a different client. You just don't do that. No attorney would do that. So the fact that they have an entire pack of attorneys working on this and can't correctly sort out slightly over a dozen boxes gives me zero confidence that they've correctly sorted out the other 200, you know.
Speaking of that State Bar, what's the problem? Is it because you know, Sirhan claims he's got amnesia. Because of that, there's no sympathy or trust from the Kennedy family. You know how they put the move on the ambassador to tear down that the pantry despite the court order. Is it just pressure? Like a lot of people like Kennedy, and they hate the fact that Sirhan was involved, and they're not going to put up with any way they can knock down Sirhan's defense, because as long as he claims amnesia, they don't believe him. Is that part of the thing with the State Bar? No sympathy for Sirhan? Could that be part of it?
I mean, all I can give is my personal opinion dealing with the case. In my opinion, no. I really, really don't think that. I mean, I'm not going to say anything against the Kennedy family. I really, you know, I have no contact with that aspect of the case whatsoever. And I don't think, I think people often jump to grand conspiracies on some of the little details when they're totally unnecessary. And frankly, I'm serious. If you read the State Bar declarations, it's like, these files are nasty and they've got silverfish and they're dusty and they've been in the garage for 20 years. Ew, nobody wants to work on them. And that is like the basis of their declarations, which is why I keep coming back to them with, you know, I'm really not that squeamish. I'll put on some gloves. I'm willing to sort the files, you know. And so are other people, you know. So I think in large measure, and I'm not going to say there isn't, you know, as a friend of mine said, he said, well, if there was anything in there that would put you in jeopardy, you can be sure government agents have already taken it out. And I'm like, you know, good point. But I really think it comes down to a lack of desire to do the work, okay? And in my opinion, it's that simple, because every declaration that came from the bar said, this is really too hard, and none of our employees want to do it, and we don't like sorting through these files, and we need another continuance because nobody will sort through the files. And that's repeatedly what it's come back down to. And the fact that they didn't find a single person to put on the service list at any of the hearings. I attended every State Bar hearing, and not one time did they notify a single client who didn't come directly from us tells me they didn't sort through the files. I look at that and say, okay, you took these boxes, you figured, yeah, the guy's dead, most of his cases are old, the only active one is in prison. Who's going to really care, you know? And that's what I really got from that. And so, you know, you let it sit around the statutory period of time until the court says, yeah, you got a destruction order, you did your job, that you file your declarations of due diligence, you say you did your job. The court will take that representation absent some argument, like on our part. That's where the order to show cause comes in. That's where you say, no, you know what? After reviewing all this, they haven't done their job. It's not appropriate. Clients' interests are not being protected. People are not getting their files. It jeopardizes people's legal standing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and reopen it. But I really, honestly, personally think it comes down to a sheer level of laziness in a bureaucratic institution, because they didn't want to deal with a sole practitioner's boxes and boxes of files, which had been ransacked. So they were no longer even in the condition that Larry kept them, because, you know, he was a stacker kind of attorney, but he was a neat stacker, you know, I mean, he worked for himself, and the stuff was, you could find it. He knew where his stuff was at. It wasn't all over the living room floor like it was when we finally got into the house. So, I mean, people had clearly just dumped his things out everywhere. So by the time the state bar took them, their attitude was like, this stuff is a mess. What do we do with it? And I just think that they were hoping that if they turned over some files on the Sirhan case, none of the other clients of Larry's were as proactive in seeking their stuff. There were a few, but there's nobody else sitting in prison, waiting on their case. The rest were environmental cases, people looking to, prove their costs and things like that, that they just figured everything would sort of go away quietly, and when the destruction order period would come, they could burn the files, be done with it, And so it's only through basically raising just a huge fuss, where we're now at the level of me agreeing with the State Bar that we don't have to point specific fingers at specific individuals over there and say, ooh, this guy's responsible for messing this up. I don't care about laying the blame. I just want to see that we, preserve the files and get them into hands where we can actually sort through them and find if there's anything relevant. And I mean, in all honesty, Larry did have other clients, and they're entitled to their files as well. I mean, it's on all levels, ethically speaking, everyone is entitled to the return of their files. And it's sad to think the State Bar is really the final stop. Like, when lawyers aren't able to continue with their practice, they're supposed to make sure that clients' interests are upheld. And by not doing this, I mean, they're really jeopardizing, clients of any attorney who isn't able to continue with his practice. So, yeah. Okay. Yes, Paul.
First of all, the comment about the Kennedy family's position on it, I don't represent the Kennedy family position on the assassination, but get-go, when I first got involved, Senator Ted Kennedy knew I was involved. He made a public statement saying if there are questions about that, they ought to be handled in an appropriate venue. And so I reported into his office all the time what I was doing, right, up until recently. And so my position is that, first of all, they were interested and not had any didn't want to interfere in the case that was being made by Teeter. I'm also now discussing with members of the family of getting involved because of this new information that Phil Van Prague has developed and which Dr. Joling has developed over the years. And so I think that we can expect not any open support, although I want that, but I don't, we're working on that. Now, in regard to Larry, Larry and I became really good friends, often competitors. But when he asked me to intercede for him to get the pantry open for audio tests, because he couldn't get agreement from the people in the school district, I went to school district people, and they said, look, we've had requests like this before, and the only way he's going to get in there is with a court order. I don't know, maybe the files will show this, that he tried to get a court order, but I don't know if he did. So
I'll comment on that when you're done.
Yeah. The other thing with Larry is I introduced him to John Meyer, one of Howard Hughes's key staffers, in competition with Robert Mayhew. Mm-hmm. They didn't get along. And so John was living in Vancouver. John Meyer came down, and we had meetings with Larry, and Meyer kept in touch with him and turned over material to Larry about the case, which he thought was helpful. I never saw it. In fact, I've really been after Meyer and said, look, I introduced you. We've been friends for 40 years, and you haven't done anything, given me anything. I want to crack this case. And recently he came out with a statement that he's going to blow the whistle on the RFK assassination. I don't know if he's going to blow a whistle, just blow hard on this. Because John's a strange character, wonderful guy, but strange. So I'm interested in finding out, if the Bar Association does have the information that Meyer turned over to Larry to help him on the case.
We're all interested in that. That's where we get back to that service list that is only 1 page long despite 200 boxes of files, because they really just didn't look for anything. I mean, the stuff I sorted out that was the basis of my declaration to them included current clients that easily could have been ascertained and notified of the court hearing. So I just did not see any effort expended on their part whatsoever to sort these files or to contact anyone or in any way find anything that any of us were looking for, regardless of who they were. And I'll say something about the Ambassador Hotel in the Pantry after I take Lisa's question.
Okay, so let's say you go through all this process, let's say you're going to get the files and then you still don't. Is there a way to sue the bar in
Well-
such a way that it might help a reopening of the Sirhan case?
I don't know about reopening the Sirhan case. I mean, in order to show cause is the appropriate tool in this situation. The judge who has jurisdiction over the case, Judge Yaffe, is pretty harsh on lawyers who screw up in his courtroom. I mean, I've watched him just rip lawyers one end and down the other. So that's, I think, why we're in now these nice negotiations with a supervisor at the state bar, because they're trying to get out of this looking not quite as bad as they look right now, with a little skin left on their hides and without nailing any particular attorneys to the wall for incompetency, which is fine with me. Like, honestly, I don't care. I mean, I'm sorry to hear they're incompetent, and that's a shame for everybody else whose cases end up in their laps. But, I think, frankly, if it's brought to the judge's attention, and that's the issue we're discussing, is if they concur with us that the files should be returned, then the judge is more likely to grant it. That indeed, we're all in agreement on this. They don't want them, we do. Yeah, let's move on here. So I think that hopefully, I am hopeful that this will result in a positive outcome without having to resort to anything further. Yes?
I had the misfortune to be in court with Larry Teeter before Judge Yaffe. You have a terrible problem with Judge Yaffe, because Larry Teeter got up before the court, in this case involved against the city of Inglewood, and said the city violated this law, the city violated that law. They did this illegal, they did that illegal. Judge Yaffe says before the court, in open session, they do illegal things all the time, so what?
Don't you just love that? Well,
Get that trash.
the only thing I'll say for Judge Yaffe is he was very complimentary to Larry's practice, while clearly not caring for Larry's choice of cases necessarily, but he praised his work at our first hearing on these files. And some of these things, I mean, the state bar it has a fiduciary responsibility to handle attorneys' files, whether they pass away, become disabled and unable to practice, or on drugs, go to prison, get disbarred. I mean, the state bar is the agency which is supposed to sort these things out and see to it that clients' interests are protected. And it makes the entire judicial system look bad when the agencies charged with these fiduciary responsibilities don't execute them properly. So frankly, it just becomes a public embarrassment. And I think the judge, in the interests of shortening that public embarrassment, will be happy to do something to rectify the situation. Whether or not he may not have necessarily all the appropriate views on the legality of different agencies' actions, this is so egregious that even the state bar at this point, now that I've finally engaged an interested supervisor, agrees that this is just downright embarrassing, okay? Because, I mean, I sent them the declaration regarding the inappropriate disposition of the files that were given to Munir last year, okay, without having anything happen except them say, well, you can come down and sort them 2 boxes at a time. We'll bring them down from the storage unit and you can look at them 2 boxes at a time. And they let it die right there and did not follow up when I sent them a follow-up letter saying, this really is not adequate. So we're finally at a level where somebody else is like, I'm not going to leave this until we see this thing out, because this looks just really, really bad. Because it is really, really bad. There aren't too many instances where an attorney passes away and has hundreds of boxes of files like this, because normally, lots of attorneys, everything's neatly filed with a nice legal secretary, and even if they die, they can find everything in a hurry. This particular situation, there's many, many more files, and they were in disarray because of what happened with Lawrence's home. So I think it's, I understand that it's not like their typical situation, but, they're supposed to deal with it whether it's typical or not, and that's the point. And at this point, it's like we no longer want them to deal with it. We'd just like them to unhand them, and legally do so, and we can move on from there and take that responsibility to distribute those files, so.
There was a gap, it sounds like there was a gap of some kind between Larry's tenure of his own files, and then I only met the man twice at COPA conferences, but I imagine that's when his health failed, before you were able to begin your current role of a sort of custodial role over the files. It sounds like there was a gap where no one was looking out for them, and I guess that's a failure of our our community, and people moved in and ate the files.
Well, I mean, without getting into Lawrence's personal life, which I have no desire to do here, but he had a woman who lived in his home, and I'll leave it at that. But, you know, she already had keys to the building, and he was in the hospital for an extended period of time, and then we took him down to Mexico, so we were all down in Mexico with him in the hospital, and, you know, there was a good 2 weeks there where, you know, Lawrence wasn't in his home, 3 weeks. And when she had custody of the property, and these other people then forced her out, but according to the neighbors, I mean, she and her cohorts were actually removing more than the people who then took it over removed. And they were not relatives of Lawrence's, but they were, you know, quasi three stages removed, almost relatives, you know? Not actually relatives, but it's not like they didn't know him, okay? And although they were also very unpleasant to deal with.
Those files likely incriminate the LAPD.
Yeah, I still get back to venial, underlying, greedy human motivations, because I think the people who took the files, frankly, aren't working for anybody. They just thought these were good things to have, you know, and whatever they think they're going to do with them, you know what I mean? I can't speak to the motivations of why the files were being ransacked, but that gap in custody of files was because there was someone living there who didn't take a custodial attitude towards them, and, you know, we acted as quickly as possible once he passed away, too. I mean, we were acting even while he was still in the hospital, attempting to deal with the premises with not a lot of cooperation. And frankly, the LAPD could care less if your house gets taken over and people change the locks. They will tell you that's a civil matter, even though, like, the place is being robbed blind while you're sitting there. And Paul was kind enough, actually, to go watch the place for me one night while stuff was being removed, because we hadn't gotten the court order yet, and it was like, well, we're going to have to sit on this house and make sure nothing walks out the front door until we have changed the locks, you know. And
The LAPD is that way, especially.
no, the LAPD is like that, especially in that neighborhood and especially lots of other places. People think the LAPD just screws up on political cases, okay? I mean, I have nothing good to say about, like, their handling of all sorts of criminal matters and investigative follow-up witnesses. I mean, incompetency is rampant amongst many, many different departments without it necessarily being motivated by any serious concern, you know. So, and I mean, we sat out there with the court order with the state bar, with 2 attorneys and 2 private investigators from the state bar, with a court order saying we had the right to come into the building. And the state bar called the LAPD to get a courtesy black and white to sit there so we could go into the building with the locksmith. We sat there for 2 hours. The cops never showed up. So the next day, we went and got a supervisor from the state bar who was ex-LAPD, and he said, we don't need the LAPD. We've got a court order. You stand back, dear. We'll go in, you know? And that's what it came down to. We were already inside the building with the locksmith. Locks changed by the time the cops actually got there to give us any assistance. So, you know? And that's from the state bar. You'd think they would work with them when they say, hey, we've got a court order, we need you out here for assistance, you know, but they didn't. So, you know, and as for the Ambassador Hotel and the pantry and all of that, at the time that Larry passed away, he did have a pending lawsuit against the Los Angeles School District on the part of the Assassination Archives and Sirhan to stop the destruction of the Ambassador Hotel in order to conduct a sound test in the pantry. And we did make some attempts to see if there was anything we could do to salvage that case once he had passed away, but the judge was really dead set against it. And then Phil Van Prague here, when he came out here 3 years ago, he and I, with another gentleman, went around, and we actually went down to the school board to find out if, you know, since it was pending destruction, was there any possibility of getting in there to do a sound test before they tore the building down? And I can't remember the gentleman's name, but the point man over at the LA Unified School District, the guy who was handling the Ambassador, you know, when you come in and say, hi, I'm here about the Ambassador Hotel, he's the guy they send out to talk to you, essentially admitted to obstruction of justice while we were standing there and said, well, you know, we never really cooperated with Lawrence Teeter on conducting a sound test because, you know, he might have found something that would have helped his case and prevented the destruction of the hotel. So, and I stood there going, oh my God, where's my tape recorder? Did this guy just admit to obstruction of justice? Did he just say they didn't let him in because he might have been right, you know? So, I mean, nothing we could really do about it, but it was just, to me, a stunning admission. It was like, of course we didn't cooperate. He might have gotten somewhere in court that way, you know? So, it's just, I don't know, the whole case is horrifying when it comes to dealing with these various agencies, so.
Phil sent me the guy's name recently, and I know him. He's
no longer there. He was chief of staff for Governor Romer, the superintendent of schools. And he was very uncooperative in things that we wanted to get done.
Yeah, I believe it.
I can understand.
And he enjoyed himself in his uncooperativeness too. He was very contented in telling us how they had not cooperated. And I thought, wow, this guy really feels good in his role of power here. So to close up, I would like to read a poem that Marion Teeter, Mrs. Teeter, Lawrence's mother, sent along with me for today because she felt it suited her son and in his memory. So I'm going to close with reading that and then let Shane go ahead and show that film. Okay, for Larry Teeter. The names of those who in their lives fought for life, who were at their hearts the fire's center. Born of the sun, they traveled a short while towards the sun and left the vivid air signed with their honor. Stephen Spender, English poet. And interestingly, Ted Kennedy also quoted this poem not that long ago, which she was very impressed by, but she felt it suited his short but very important life. Thank you so much. I forgot my other dual duties. So he said, do I need to say anything about KPFK? Yes. KPFK is our proud media sponsor today. I serve on the nonprofit board of KPFK, and I'm the treasurer of the station. And they very graciously agreed to give us media sponsorship, and there's frankly quite a lot of interest in this on the part of many people over there. So if you're not already a subscriber of 90.7 KPFK, our local Pacifica affiliate, please consider joining, and you can ask for more of this type of programming. Okay, thank you so much.
I will back up Jamie's point about thinking about files and archiving, though, in this community. Many key researcher files have been lost because there weren't arrangements made. There is an Assassination Archive and Research Center in D.C., but the files in there are not easily accessible. They have a small office in D.C., and then they have a big warehouse in Virginia, and you have to sort of know what you're looking for. And they're overcrowded now because all of the records released under JFK Records Act went to them as well. But there are some individual researchers, and then I have some files from individual researchers. But, for instance, an early critic, Holcomb Heston, just to give you one example, who had tracked intelligence from World War II period forward and was one of the first to figure out that there were major questions. And he wrote Oswald Assassin or Fall Guy. He wrote a Truth newsletter. He wrote many books about the Kennedy assassination. Well, he had a house in New York, and I just by chance ran into a guy who had some of his books and truth letters that I didn't have, and I was trying to arrange with him. And I said, well, how'd you get these? And he said, oh, I know his wife, and I liked his writing, but he liked his writing outside of the Kennedy assassination, so he wasn't that concerned with these materials. He gave them to me. But he said that when Holcomb Heston passed on, that May had given these to him, and I said, well, what about the rest of the stuff? Where is it? And he said, oh, well, she just told the realtor to clean the basement out. So all of the files, not just on Kennedy assassination, but the mob and all these years of, he wrote a book called They Called Intelligence, just were turned into garbage. And unfortunately, that happens too if we don't think ahead. And it's one of the reasons that I'm hoping that my sort of major project here is a little late in my life, but I'm doing everything I can to get grants to make it happen, is to start a hidden history museum in Washington, D.C., where many people can see the exhibits, but also have a research center attached that would include the files and the work of all the critics.
Can't you do an add-on to the Spy Museum?
Yeah, well, it's kind of like, I think we're sort of going to end up being the anti-spy museum, but that's not a very pleasant place over there. But they, for instance, got a $6 million grant. It's a joint D.C. and federal grant to start that museum, and it's potentially open to other museums in D.C. So I'm getting funded at this point to search funding, but I am getting some grants from a private foundation. But I think we should think about keeping things and making sure that we have provisions for our records and files if something should happen to us.
Yeah, I was literally just talking to Paul Schrade about Greg Stone's files were turned over to USC, and they made me jump through all these hoops to see them. And when I finally got through the last hoop, they said, well, you have to tell us exactly what you're looking for, and then we'll go get it. I'm like, I won't know what I'm looking for till I find it. So it's like, what a nightmare. All these you know, this great collection.
Well,
that I
I'm very
put
worried
into.
about them being given to universities for that reason. I don't think they know the significance of them. Things have disappeared out of the Dartmouth collection that Lansing did. I think we have to have people that are actually involved in wanting to know the truth have some control over these files. So that's a start anyway. And Shane O'Sullivan is next. He has this film, RFK Must Die. I think he's going to make a few opening comments here and then show you the film. And then at 7 o'clock we have dinner. So, and I think, does anyone have the time current?
20 of 6.
Okay, so it films an hour and 10 minutes. So that'll put us close to 7, and then he can have some questions or something at the end.
Should we postpone dinner? It's scheduled at 7 right now.
No, I think,
40 minutes to the film's on.
oh, it's 40,
We'll
oh,
run over. Do you want me to schedule dinner a little down?
I guess bump it
I'll
back.
bump it.
Okay. All right, so we'll show is Shane here?
Yeah,
Okay. He can come up.